Hello, and welcome to Leadership is a Philosophy, Not a Checklist, video discussion 24 on the Stanford Prison Experiment. This is an Ordinary Men episode. So again, if you watched the previous one I did on the Milgram experiment, this video is basically a follow-up and continuation of this idea that I realized over the past few weeks. And so this is the result of that. We're going to go through it. If you would like to get better context and make sure you're not jumping in the middle, go watch the one I did on obedience to authority, which is the Stanley Milgram one. And then we'll jump right into this. Okay. So don't want to waste too much time. Again, the archetypal leadership model. If you're new to the channel, I've explained this in other places, but this is the objective standard that we use to evaluate whether or not somebody's a leader or just a person in charge. And so these are the personality traits that I think leaders have. And then here's what the talent that leaders have. This is the essential characteristics that they need that have been around for thousands of years. And then these are 4 archetypes from the Tao Te Ching, different sources over the past several thousand years to currently. And they delineate a leader or a person in charge, and then good character or bad character. But like I said, this is the objective standard. Not so important in these series of videos because we're talking about different stuff. All right. So the Stanford experiment. Again, the reason the Milgram experiment happened is because the guy Stanley Milgram wanted to see if we could represent the Holocaust or replicate the Holocaust in America if people were given the ability to do so. This guy, this doctor, Zimbardo, was inspired by him and wanted to see what happens if you have people in groups and give them specific roles. Now, you go and look up a bunch of different videos on this experiment, and there's all these crazy things that people are saying about it, and all of them are true, but I look at it from a different perspective, and that's what we're going to explain. So I'm not going to rehash everything about the experiment. I'm going to give some indicators. If you would like, go look up the Stanford experiment, and there's plenty of videos on it that other people have done talking about the specifics. All right. So his idea was we're going to replicate a prison, and then we're going to see if people based off of the roles start acting like those roles, if they start being embodied by the archetype, if we're going to follow the Carl Jung example. So they got 24 people. They tested them. They were making sure they didn't have criminal records. They did some other stuff. So they were students, different than the Milgram experiment, which is just people off the street. Most of these were students. And they screened them, and then they basically did just a random assortment to see who was going to be a guard and who was going to be a prisoner. And it was all fake, so they did it in the basement of Stanford under some hall. I forget where it was. And then they assigned these people the roles. So the 2 rules were you couldn't hit anybody and you couldn't put them in solitary confinement for more than an hour. Okay. So they launched, and what happened is on the first day, not a whole lot happened. People just sort of did what they were supposed to do. On the next day, things started to get a little weird. And at one point, one of the guards actually hit one of the prisoners. Now, this is where the experiment gets weird because you start hearing stuff afterwards. It turns out that one of the guards, like I said, there was some encouragement. So what happened is some of the guards or some of the people observing the experiment went to the guards, again, students, and said, hey, be a little more rough with them. We want to see what happens if you're a little more rough. So there was some encouragement. There was some cajoling. There was some changes and all this sort of stuff. And then it became bad, right? So there's one guard, and you can find it in most videos. He was an 18 or 19-year-old kid. Maybe he's 19 or 20. And he said, well, I'm thinking this is what the experimenters want. I'm going to do an experiment of my own, and I'm going to try to act like the prison warden from Cool Hand Luke and start being a real tool. So he did this, and so other people started to experiment on their own. Now, the other guards didn't do anything radical, but these couple of guards, there was this guy and one other, started becoming a little crazy. Okay. So after 6 days, They were sitting there doing the experiment, and somebody came from outside, saw what was going on. There was a bunch of yelling and screaming, and not physical abuse, but a bunch of, basically dehumanization and all this sort of stuff. Person complained and said, "This is terrible." The experiment was supposed to last for 2 weeks. They stopped it after 6 days. And then, because of the ethics of the thing, they basically made a bunch of rules and experiments saying you can't do these things anymore. Okay. So that's basically a real quick summary of the experiment. So then what happened is people said, well, that's impossible. People were doing what they were expected to do. Recurring theme, correct? Or listen to that line. So a bunch of these people are scientists looking at the outcome of the experiment. I'm looking at it from a macro level. So there was guards that thought, oh, I'm a guard. And they were told to be a little rough. Oh, I'm going to act like a jerk. I'm going to do this sort of thing. Okay. So they tried to recreate it, right? There's several different examples. So there was that one, but then they couldn't recreate it because of some of the restrictions. BBC did a television show at the right around 2000, 2001 called The Experiment, where they did a similar thing, but it was basically reality TV. So they're filming everything. Everybody knew they were on camera. So again, different than the original. And then there's this website or a YouTube channel called Mindfield, and they looked at it and they did their own version of an experiment with different conditions, right? And in each one of them, people behave differently. So remember what we're talking about. Remember the one from the Milgram experiment. So they screened people differently. They had different rules in each one of these cases. The conditions were different, and people acted differently. So the great example is the one for Mindfield. They screened people to make sure that they were conscientious, seemed like they had good character, a bunch of other stuff, then gave them the power to do something sort of obnoxious to another group of people. And they did the obnoxious thing, but they never exceeded any crazy levels. And everybody goes, oh, see, so here's what happens. If you give people, you pick the right people and you have good guidance, then you're going to get different results. My point. We're getting there. Okay, so let's look at it, right? So Ordinary Men, we've got the video on that one. My Lie, Me Lie, we did that one. Abu Ghraib, I'm never going to do a video on Abu Ghraib because I happen to know somebody pretty well in that event, and I don't have good things to say, so I'm not going to say anything. But in those cases, right, weak or flimsy leadership, non-existent or non-present leadership, poor guidance, loose conditions, nobody checking, terrible results. And this is Germans, this is American soldiers, right? German soldiers in World War II. So these are the examples that we get of what happens if you don't have clear examples, if you have loose conditions, if you encourage people to do wrong things, if you give them bad examples. And then the example that I love is, you have some of these big corporations, I'm not going to say who because you know the news, that suddenly people are going around unionizing because they're being abused at the workplace. They're not being offered humanitarian stuff. The examples that I've given of organizations where people have committed suicide because the leadership was so terrible. The experiment's been run. We know what happens if you don't select and put the right people in power, then give them power, and then don't check on them or turn a blind eye. It's consistent. It's constant all the time. There aren't any examples of that not. I mean, read, what was it? Lord of the Flies. What was it? Children of the Corn. Okay, so leadership analysis. This is going to be real similar, right? What's to be made of this? Well, it's once again behavioral proof of Ordinary Men. In Ordinary Men, about 20% of the guards were really bad. There was a small percentage that became sadists and were really enjoying it. Same thing that happens in these other experiments. Same thing that happened in Abu Ghraib and My Lie. There was a bunch of people that didn't participate and a bunch that just loved it. Human nature. People will do what they are told or allowed to do. So you go in there and tell the guards, be tough, be rough and tumble, make sure you make them uncomfortable. Well, what does that mean? So somebody who has weak character or a vivid imagination, well, I know it's going to make me uncomfortable, so I'm going to do that to these people. Right? It happens all the time. Yeah, we talked about this before. The line between good and evil runs through every human heart. So if every human being has the potential for evil, why don't we create the environment that gives them potential to be good and the expectation that they're good? I don't know. You tell me. So this is clear proof that, like I just said with these places, if you have terrible guidance, you've got terrible conditions, leadership's not present, nobody's checking, bad things are going to happen. Well, what happens if you have positive reinforcement, the expectation to be your best, and then leadership presence making sure that people are trying to be their best? What's going to happen? Well, they're going to perform better. Because suddenly it's, well, I can't even go to this category of behavior anymore because it's not expected, it's not condoned, it's not allowed. This is what I'm supposed to do. Now, you might lose some people because you're not going to have the sadists. But what happened to somebody that wants to be a saint? Right? We don't know. So I sort of said this before. So there doesn't need to be an experiment to see if this is going to work. We all know what happens if you have a place with a toxic work environment. You promote toxic people. You promote abusive and demeaning people. You promote people that are all about power. We've seen the experiment. So then pretty soon everybody goes, oh, well, in order for me to do that, I have to be those things. It's terrible. You know, well, I shouldn't say that. So in any case, right, there should be an example of the ideal that you want if you're going to be in charge of people. So then people have that example to aim for instead of, hey, don't care that somebody that worked for you committed suicide because you were so terrible, but you made us a lot of money. Right? What's the line? What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? Great. So you've got all the money on the planet and people are killing themselves because you're so terrible. Right? I don't want to be that person. So yeah, the behavior is modulated by direction and the environment. So you give people clear guidance, make sure that you don't go over here, don't go there at all. And as I said before, what happens if we let people be as good as possible? Now there's one thing, of course, I'm waiting till the end of the second video. There's one thing that I forgot that's about this, and it's also present in the Milgram experiment. The closeness of the person in charge matters. The proximity of the person giving the direction matters. So here, they were observing them through cameras. Nobody was in the room telling the guards they couldn't do stuff. So when they started putting bags on people's heads and making them get undressed and all this sort of stuff, nobody went in and said that's unacceptable. So they kept doing it. If in the Milgram experiment, if somebody was on the phone telling people to continue pushing the buttons and flipping the switches, the compliance went way down. So that means that you can, if your open door policy as a leader should be the door is open for you to walk out and go check on something. It's not for people, it's not for you to sit and wait for people to come to you. You got to go check. That's the vigilance part of the character example. Sorry, I get a little passionate. I don't want to talk about Abu Ghraib. You can go read the report on Abu Ghraib, and after reading this, looking at all this stuff and my project, and look at Abu Ghraib, and you'll know how I feel. It's the best way to do it without getting myself in trouble. I apologize for the edit. You get passionate about something, you start going crazy, don't have a good script, you make mistakes. Here's the conclusion. If we go and look over here at this example where we talk about screening people respond differently, what do we have to make sure that we're doing? Well, we have to make sure that we're screening and identifying and then keeping an eye on the people that we're going to give power to. If we pick people that are conscientious, they have good character, they don't want to go out and be sadistic, and they've got the talent to lead, and then we put those people in charge, and then we keep an eye on them, we're not going to have terrible outcomes. kind of the most important conclusion of the whole video, and I skipped it because I was talking too fast. So I know I said we were going to skip it, but this is why this model makes sense. You have to have somebody that's got openness to experience, positive emotion, they're assertive, they want to work hard. They've got the ability to attune competence and environmental hierarchies. They have humility, integrity, empathy, and vigilance. They've got good aspects of that. You find those people and put them in and give them the power. Because, as is demonstrated in a couple of these other experiments, you get better outcomes. So just taking somebody that's got a certificate and has been their entire life wants to be in charge of something, and then giving them power is probably not going to go well for you. You have somebody that's been brought up in an environment where all they saw was toxicity and yelling and screaming and abuse and ego. And so they copy that person and you put that person in charge, not going to go well for you. The person that should be in the most authority should least want it. Right? The sure sign that somebody's like, oh, I want power because I want to treat some people like crap. That person should never have power. So that's the reason that this is here. And that's the reason it's so complicated. And this is the reason that it's taken so long to get to this point. This is what you're looking for. You're looking for the leader, barely known, respected, and trusted, good character, intelligent, lazy, which means they don't want to do too much work, let the other people do work. Or the next best is good character, but no talent. So you put that person in charge, at least they're not going to be abusing people. But the people down here are the ones that are stupid and lazy and don't have humility. This is how it works. This is the reason for it. So of course, find the right people and put them in charge, not just promote because fill in the blank reason, whatever the reason is. They need to be promoted because you think that they can be trusted with power. And then you have to watch them to make sure that they don't they're going to get corrupted by it. So you got to move them before they get corrupted. Or have things in place that, nope, you can't do that. All right, sorry for the interrupt. It's going to be a little bit of a choppy edit because I didn't want to have to redo the whole video. I apologize. And now back to your regularly scheduled program. Okay, so that's it, right? This is just an experiment. This is just a continuation of the same thing, and it's the same examples. So as a leader, you can't let people do the wrong thing. You know, and your job, if somebody comes in and says, oh, this person said something, but make sure that it's right or wrong. Make sure that they're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. And you know what's wrong. All right. A little short, but that's okay. Okay, so I just did a screen grab from one of the videos. There's several documentaries that you can go find. There's some recent ones. There's some older ones. There's some 5-minute. There's a whole bunch of stuff talking about this because everybody's going, oh, this is so controversial. As a leader, to me, this should be taught to every single person that's going to be in charge of human beings, and they should be evaluated against this standard. We need to understand that this is what can happen or what will happen. It's inevitable. Go back and watch the video I did on power, the one I did on spirit. That all feeds into this. This all feeds into that. This is the first scientific proof, or at least attempted scientific proof of the stuff we're talking about in this project. Anyway, try to keep this one short. Appreciate your time as always. Appreciate your attention. And I hope you have a great day.